My name is Becky Metcalf, and on behalf of Design Centre Chelsea Harbour, a very warm welcome to London Design Week. A little bit of housekeeping first. If I could ask you just to turn your phones off, that would be really wonderful. Thank you. So new talent is incredibly important in the interior design industry. So I'm particularly pleased to welcome onto our stage today some really amazing designers. Mimi Shonde, Alex Holloway and Nali are all here. And who better to speak to them than a man with his finger on the style pulse than the editor-in-chief of Elle Decoration, Ben Spriggs. Should we give them a very warm welcome?
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here with Mimi, Alex, and Nar as well. And it's, really exciting to bring some kind of new talent here to Chelsea Harbour. I really wanted to get us together because I think it's really interesting. We'll discuss what their work, but essentially their practices are a similar age, but they have a slightly different aesthetic, but it really represents for me the new breed of interior designers in London. And they have a very, they're both based in the UK, but they have a very global approach and scope, which is fascinating. Mimi's based in central London, and you set up your business in 2015, I believe. 2015. While you were still studying.
Yes.
And you have this kind of very kind of sculptural, sensuous kind of style, which kind of fuses kind of European modernism with a kind of African heritage, which is fantastic. Holloway Lee met at the Bartlett School. Well, I don't know if you met. You both studied at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and then met when you were at Michaelis Boyd.
Yeah.
Both working, I think, on Soho Farmhouse.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of you did the gym, one of you did the main farm barn. And you're kind of known for this modern opulence, the kind of theatrical touches, kind of a real kind of filmic quality to your work, which is great. Coming to you first, how did you get into interiors and design in the first place?
Well, we're architects by training, and I think it kind of started as, well, naturally you spend a lot of time inside. You spend more time inside a property than on the outside looking at the nice kind of facade detailing. So as architects, we kind of pivoted towards interior architecture, and that kind of, I guess, part of a frustration born out of maybe the pace of architecture being particularly slow to get something built. So if you focus more on the interiors, or at least commercial interiors, it's much more fast-paced, and it kind of suited us a lot more. So when we met at Michaelis Boyd, we were working on these kind of really, really fast-paced, kind of interesting briefs, like Soho Farmhouse or one-off restaurants, and it was just kind of a pace that suited our kind of sensibilities a lot more naturally, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you asked this question. Thinking back, I think I'm quite lucky to be surrounded by creative families, I think. Originally, I'm from China. My grandpa was one of the first generation film directors. So I found myself from a very young age, played around the film sets, get inspired by these perspective background jobs where you pretend you're on a field, but it's actually a painting behind. So I think that influenced me from the very beginning of get interested by film sets and a human scale spaces. So, and then when I moved to the UK, my guardians, actually they are interior designer and art professor. So they guided me to look at different museums, galleries, and also introduced me to different art courses. So when I applied for universities, I get really intrigued by the Ballet of University, the Ballet in the UCL. I think it's also because I wanted to study architecture because it's a sense of overall design and history and architecture. But professionally, we chose kind of towards the interior-focused space. As I said earlier, I think I am always interested in a human scale, so where you experience the space and also the detailing of everything. So that's when you do interior, that's where the focus are.
Yeah,
so,
that emotional connection.
Correct, yeah.
And Mimi, it was the same for you. You studied interior architecture
I studied interior architecture, but I guess I didn't really start in interior architecture. I'm trained as a fine artist,
I wanted to study fine art, but having strict Nigerian parents, that was a no-go.
Yeah.
So I guess interior architecture was like the closest thing for me that was, I guess, still creative, but had, I guess, the structural kind of engineering elements to it. So that's how it started, really, at university, yeah. Well, I first thought,
That's great. And but I think it's fascinating. You obviously knew exactly where you wanted to go and set up your company while you were still there.
For sure. I mean, I've always been very brave and courageous. I've always known that I wanted to have my own studio. So I've been very kind of tunnel vision with that. You know, even when I was in school, like I'll skip lectures and you know draw and design. So yeah, just got on with it. Yeah, definitely.
And were there any, when you were starting out, were there any particular projects or designers that kind of influenced you or inspired you?
I mean, gosh, the way my mind works. I mean, I guess I have so many kind of micro influences. So there are certain scenes, soundtracks, people, just things that I remember that just, I guess, spark this fire in my brain, and that's kind of where the design comes from. But I would say if I were to pick a particular project, I'll say will be the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. That was, I guess, the first project that really was like, this is something I can, the sleekness to it, exactly.
Absolutely. And Alex, when we spoke to you for the magazine a while ago, you talked about this idea of bringing your kind of Catholic school background and mixing it with a bit of kind of kind of clubbing culture and kind of high-low.
Yeah, I think like influence-wise, we always try to steer. We always tell our team like, let's try and steer away from designers and project influences. Let's talk about like the cultural influences that are going to like the ingredients of a project can be your influences from anywhere. And so I think a kind of theme of our work would be a clash of high and low cultural elements and kind of, I guess, kind of visually two things that I always kind of come back to is not being kind of scared of decoration, because architects can be traditionally scared of flourish and decorative and layering. But kind of spending a lot of time daydreaming in churches growing up, then you kind of think, well, you know, they're telling a story here. We can tell a story with the interiors. It's a powerful tool to tell a story with. So, and then kind of conversely, spending a lot of my 20s in clubs, that whole like visual feast that they put on a show, and that's all to do with lighting and sound and kind of feelings that are created around the senses, and those influence a lot of the way we think and talk about work, and when we set up the visual ingredients of a project, I think at the beginning.
Yeah, and now there's obviously this filmic quality we talked about, this theatrical, that obviously comes from your background.
Yeah. I think there's two aspects from my inspiration. One is when I was young in China, and in the 1890s, actually, there was still the old traditional, or like the quite early influence, like the quite institutional color palette, like the red, the green, and also the quite laced fabrics and the velvets. I think that kind of a rich but quite retro palette that have kind of influenced our design a bit. And also, I think for me personally, because that transition from being in Far East come to the UK, I am very intrigued. Like the first project, like Mimi said, I was very inspired by Sir John Soane's museum. That's probably my favorite building in the UK. And it was introduced actually by my first boss, Tatum, when I worked there. And I remembered I went there many, many times because there are so many rooms to explore and so many surprises to review in that building. I'm quite lucky to have my wedding reception there, actually.
I liked it that much.
Yes. And I decided to show my guests, like, at the museum, my favorite building.
Love that.
And then I thinking back, like, what kind of quality of that building really inspired. I think it is like, especially the breakfast room in the museum, that the way they use a colored stain film on the glass, that Soane's like a famous touch in the room. That that just one very simple change that brings the whole space with a different atmosphere. So it's always with a huge light, dimmed light in that space. So if you look at our recent works, like for example, the market building that we just recently did, that we use, like how we treated that big windows. So we use those panels that with different colors to it. So it brings like the natural light with a filtered color. And then often you see when we do FFE or loose dressing in the space, we often like to think about having just another layer of drapes with colors. So it's kind of like to leverage that the natural light you have, but you adding another layer just to bring that interest in the space.
Yeah.
So I think, to answer your question, I think all this space that we went to visit, there's naturally inspired us for our current, like it's build-ups to where we are now. Yeah.
Fantastic. I should say, by the way, that we have some rolling video here, which is kind of different projects and factors that these guys have worked on. So interesting talking about natural light, because obviously you just mentioned the Barcelona Pavilion, and I think a real kind of aspect of your work is this kind of grandeur and light together.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's all about, I guess, feeling a sense of calm within a space. And when I first visited the pavilion, I just felt this huge sense of calm. And I guess I kind of emulate that a lot of my works, and I use a lot of natural, I guess, exposed materials and really refined finishes, and I would definitely say, I guess, my design ethos definitely aligned with the pavilion.
Yeah. And there's a great sense of scale. A lot of the projects you've done and your furniture designs, they're incredible in terms of they're monumental.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still surprised whenever I see them. I'm like, oh God, this is big. So it's.
Because I think on a recent project you've had to do a 3-meter cabinet or something.
Yeah. I think everything we do is like 3 meters minimum. So I mean, right now we're working on a project in Kuwait, and we have to design a table that's 8 meters to sit 28 people, which is insane. But but yeah.
And are there any other, in terms of your influences, any other things that have influenced you in terms of cultures?
I guess the way I set up my studio is, I guess it has a very global, aspect to it. And I think that just stems from my love for just different cultures, people. I'm really inspired by, artisans, and I guess traveling. Like I've traveled, like I said before, I've traveled all through Europe just to find, artisans and craftsmen, and I'm just really interested in how people do things and the history behind why people do things. So I guess that kind of carries on to my work and the work that I produce. Yeah.
Great. So if we can move on to the kind of creative process that you use, and like how you take a project from conception through to kind of final finish. Alex, how does that work? Because I know your approach is slightly different to Nina.
Well, I think, when it comes to the early stages of a project, we will, when we talk about world building in the office, we talk a bit about storytelling and narrative, but then this idea of world building, where you kind of set up the brief and the context are the things that give you the kind of visual influences or the starting points, and then you can kind of build a world around the client's brief, and it might be also adding kind of protagonists or other things into that setup. If you imagine like the client is the protagonist, and the context or the site is the backdrop or the setting, and then we might kind of have that kind of overall story that we want to draw out, and then we might add on a kind of layer of detail in how we might treat materials. So we have kind of, we talk about two things. One is world building and one is kind of material alchemy, and how we can kind of, because really what you're doing is creating this setting or backdrop using different material processes or intrigue, and we want to translate that story into a material process, or how we treat a specific thing, so you get an unexpected innovation as part of that
I love
project.
that idea of world building. I think that's kind of.
Yeah.
But, and I also, obviously, you do a lot of luxury hospitality as well as residential. So it must be interesting when you haven't got a specific client, so you have to imagine someone who could be existing in that space.
Well, I think, it depends. We always have, it's very different for a private resi than for a commercial. In a way, when we do a hotel, you've got the room count is how many clients you have, because that's kind of the way you've got to look at it in a way. But I think, because that person's not living in it day to day, then you can go a bit more transgressive with your design, and it can be a bit more offbeat or a bit more challenging, because people can put up with that for a few days, or in fact they enjoy it, but then they're done living in a pink room after a few days, so there's different registers we pitch it at. But it's those two things: material process that we draw out with how we build the world around it, and the narrative that kind of rings through. And you want to have a good story because it still takes us these projects are on the books for years sometimes. So you want to have enough of a story there that you can keep adding to that story as you go through, and it carries the attention of you and your team and your client through that journey as well. Yeah, it's important.
And now I was going to say, obviously, one residential project you worked on in Marylebone for a Chinese calligrapher, really resonated with me because it is this kind of mix of modern and traditional. You've got antiques in there, but you've got this kind of brass light fittings, herringbone tiles.
Yeah, I think, as Alex said, it's really a different starting point when we work for a residential client and commercial. So refer to that project you just mentioned, like it's to me like having a residential project. It is to make friends with the client, to really know him or her or the family, and so I usually, to start with like a challenging brief, interesting brief, is like I try to understand, get my head around like why he runs a Qing Dynasty room in a graded 2 listed building. It's like, why? Then I realized actually he's come from a quite political background, and also he used to study politics and culture and traditional Chinese philosophy. And so the dialogue that I had with the client at the beginning is really inspiring, and even I learned a lot from them. So I would say like the process is not just to provide a service, it is to have a dialogue with the client, to bounce ideas and to build on top of the narratives. And our role as designers is to use our skill sets and our imagination to make a space that representable for the client. Like for this project on the screen, you can see now it is I think it's quite successful doing that job. Is kind of mix the traditional Chinese craftsman and the listed building, and and then so I think for commercial projects then, whereas there are similar things because it is about knowing the background of the brand, because normally it is rather established hotel brand come to us, or a new brand that the people have a vision for it. So we also need to understand their existing consumers' patterns, but at the same time, I think in that instance, our role is to see the potential of what the brand can offer. So normally for commercial projects, we will start to have a thinking piece at the beginning of doing the research and suggest there's other potential, there's other way that you can offer offering in your brand for the new era. So yeah, and then as Alex said, we need to give us enough reason, passion at the beginning, so we can eventually deliver it to become reality. Because we are kind of from beginning to handover type of practice. So we are interior designers, also architects. So we will oversee the project here, and so we need something kind of exciting at the beginning and then deliver it in like 2-3 years throughout the project.
And Mimi, in terms of your relationships with the clients, because again, a majority of your work is residential,
Yeah.
and has been to this point.
Yeah.
How does that work? How do you kind of manage that?
Gosh, I would say for me, the client is the story, and I kind of build the narrative around their lifestyle. So I guess when I first start on a project, it's so important for me to know everything about the client. I ask, what do you like to eat? What's your favorite music? What do you do over the weekends? Because at the end of the day, when you're designing a space, it has to fit within their lifestyle. And then I guess it changes. Sometimes I guess I can. Most of the time, my clients trust me to just do my thing. Other times they, give me a brief, but it just depends on the project really. But I would say the most important thing is understanding the client and their lifestyle and their needs and what they want, and that forms the narrative and then forms the space. Yeah.
And adding to that, I think sometimes the client actually already know what they want, but it's just how they express it.
Yeah,
So we
for sure.
kind of come to that decision is help the client to express what they want, because sometimes actually when at the end of project we're like, actually that was what the client said about at the beginning.
It's just how you get there.
It's how they get there.
Yeah. Completely. And it's interesting, kind of, I think in both your works there is this kind of meeting of the artistic and the architectural, and I kind of wanted to know how you thought those two elements can exist in the same space. Maybe.
Gosh, I would say I am stubbornly art-led.
Right.
I often work on form and not function, but my furniture does work.
Yes.
I will put that there.
But it's very sculptural.
It's very sculptural, and I do like beautiful things, and I do think good design is the perfect balance between art and architectural art and function. So I think both of them can coexist, and they both need each other. So yeah.
Absolutely.
With the architecture, it's we work in London. Most of our work's in London, at least, and we tend to never really work on a new build property. It's always refurb. So there's always an existing architectural element or portion which sets a lot of the parameters of a project, and then it's about just kind of working out kind of where the assets are and what the assets that we want to kind of promote and sing and bring in through the design, and that's kind of, it can be a number of different inspiration elements to a project, or it can be kind of creating a strategy around that backdrop. So for one of our hotel projects, we wanted to create quite we didn't have a huge budget, but it's about kind of working out, well, we don't need to cover all of that up actually. How about if we have that and that exposed, and then we can use our budget kind of more strategically elsewhere. So it's about kind of really understanding the meat, the bones of the project before you get in there. And often that doesn't really work. Like looking at a plan, when you get a survey through, or a client sends a site and says, put a price together or think of something for this, and actually you kind of need to spend time in a place, and you see how the light falls through which windows, and that kind of thing you can never really do that by looking at a drawing. With the architectural brain, we need to be there and also have the drawing. and then we can start to piece it together.
And then you, I guess, apply those kind of artistic touches on top of that architectural
and
structure.
But it will be kind of artistic touches, but kind of using the assets of the building as best you can, like kind of realizing, well, this should be actually where the living room should be, because that gets the best afternoon light, rather than, and that should be where the kitchen is because that gets the best morning light. And it's these kind of things that you should. I've only recently kind of come to understand this myself, because I was doing bought my first flat, and I've been doing it up over the last year, and you kind of, what I drew at the beginning is nothing like what I've ended up with. I made all the mistakes that you always tell a client not to do, which is to, start on site with a builder before you have a fully worked out plan, make it, all that stuff. I made all the mistakes. That's because I realized, like, fuck, that room needs to be over there. Yes. And actually, maybe I don't need this to be like that at all. And then, ended up turning a 2-bed flat into a 1-bed flat.
Yeah.
So what awful kind of financial decisions, but actually it's the best thing for the property.
Yeah.
And now I think that first time when you first draw the sketch is such a power that you have, because then that sets kind of a lot of the framework for how the project will then end up being. And actually we should probably, you take a lot more time at the beginning before you do that first drawing, because that so that you've got enough of an understanding before you then set yourself down a certain pathway.
But I guess every project is a learning.
Yeah, no,
process.
of course,
Sure.
yeah,
You
yeah.
constantly learn and as you
Yeah.
go.
No project's ever the same.
No.
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 Yeah, that's one thing I've learned.
Yes, changes. And I wanted to just touch on craftsmanship, because again, even though the look of both your projects are very different, there is a kind of a real kind of emphasis on detail and craftsmanship in what you do. So why is it so important?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the be all and the end all, really. I mean, it's one thing to have a great design, and it's another thing to execute it.
Yeah.
And so I spend all my time, I guess, literally living in my workshop with my makers, and I guess talking about finishes and finding, I guess, faults that we can improve on. So I have a great respect and adoration for craftsmen. I'm all about supporting local artisans and craftsmen. I mean, everything we do is made in the UK. I guess before Brexit, I used to produce in Europe. Then Brexit came, COVID didn't work. So I'm now UK based, and I think it was the best decision that I made, because one, it's easier, and two, you can spend way more time focusing on getting the product perfect. So yeah, and I guess in my interior design spaces, majority of everything is bespoke. I mean, a lot of my clients want everything bespoke. So I couldn't do what I do without the craftsmen. Yeah.
And is that led by the spaces themselves in terms of to get the scale of furniture you need? It's going to need to be kind of bespoke. Or
It depends. It depends. I mean, some clients want they'll say we want a bookshelf, we want a cabinet, we want this, and I just design around the space. Other times it could be an existing piece that I have, and we just redevelop it and scale it to fit within the space. So it varies, it changes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And now with you, how do you work with craftspeople in your projects?
Yeah, I love the topic craft because I think we ultimately, we as designers or architects, we are like curators and directors in films. So our role is to use our eye, our skills to curate the objects and textures and colors and forms all harmoniously together. And then for each of the materials or objects, then each of them are a project on its own. So then the craftsman or the people making it, adding another layer to the whole project. So if you imagine every object, every materials, every textures, there is a personal touch, like really hands-on to it. Yeah. Then that's a very rich and layered project at the end. And I think having also there's two angles. I think is the personal angle is like if you have someone is personally made that object, that it will review that when the end customers to touch it and you can feel the tension or the detail to it. And then the other angle, I think, is the hot topic now, like sustainability, because having craftsmen, the bespoke made, that doesn't mean expensive. It means locally sourced, that you're actually meeting face to face to the person creating the object. Yeah. It makes it much more low impact, and it doesn't add a lot of like financial burdens and transportation behind it. So it's actually you are working locally with someone to create something locally. So I think I love like our project at the beginning. We didn't always have an agenda of how to make things a bit more personalized and also more sustainable.
Yeah, I think that eco thing is obviously a big driver in the work that you've done. You've used recycled concrete. There's other elements and materials you've used.
Craft doesn't only comes from making things. Sometimes come from recycling things, reuse things. So it is about how you have that connection with the material itself to make it becomes a a more decorative or artistic object. Because if something is made beautifully and have a meaning, reason behind it, people tend to appreciate it more, so to keep it longer. Yeah.
And I would say, because with my work, it's that they're a large sculptural influence for me. So the craftsmanship for me is like, honestly, I still, when I in the workshop, I'm like a kid. I'm like still so excited by every little thing, and I guess just the talents that these guys have, it's just it's something that should just be so appreciated because there are lots of very talented
Completely.
artisans.
And going back to texture as well, I think obviously texture is so important to what you do. I think it's just an interview you just done with us that you said to me, it's like using flavours in cooking.
Yes.
You kind of layer those kind of textures.
Yes. I mean, sometimes my clients are a little bit apprehensive. They're like, ooh, we're not sure about adding this and that. I'm like, no, trust me. It's gonna come out well.
Gives it that depth.
They're usually happy with it. So yeah.
That's good. So obviously you're kind of relative newcomers to an established industry. I just wanted to ask you what makes your approach unique, different to kind of what's gone before? What makes you kind of modern and fresh?
I guess there's for our commercial clients, definitely. I think people want to work with us because they know we've got a young team and they're wanting to appeal to a youthful mindset as well as demographic. And I think we assist in that process because we can help them with the creative strategy part of the project as well. And we can say, so it's more about the kind of feelings created by the project as well as the flexibility that it needs to offer to fit the way people want to work and live and operate now. So I think especially with we're working on some co-living schemes and some hotel schemes where the idea of the traditional hotel lounge, let's say, is completely different to what our clients want it to be completely different to what the hotel lounge would have traditionally been. It's actually now it's a place which has a co-working emphasis, or there could be some F&B that caters to different times in the day, or there might be some meeting rooms or some other element that you wouldn't have seen maybe before. And the same with kind of co-living. It's like trying to work out what is this new typology that is somewhere between residential and hotel and what that needs to be. And then kind of building in our own knowledge into how we help them with the brief. So I think that's kind of part of what we kind of do that's different. I think stylistically we are different in that I'd say our design's a bit more kind of future facing. I'd say the last kind of 15, 20 years has been characterized by heritage revival and industrial sort of Soho house kind of aesthetic. And now that you're starting to get millennials infiltrating client side, whereas before it was just boomer orientated.
Yes.
Now that stylistically is changing, and you're starting to see digital aesthetics permeate what is kind of the zeitgeist of interior design. So you're seeing
that rise of futurism is interesting.
And it's maybe you're seeing a lot of Instagram accounts which are just CGIs of these fantastical worlds, and actually then because that is taste making and that is prevalent, and that's kind of what people are starting to want in their interiors, and in a way it's drawing on retro but 80s and 90s. So I really used to love watching Big Brother because I loved the houses that they were in. I was thinking, like, these are crazy. What is this? This is cool. But that kind of really disappeared over the last 20 years. And you would have thought that would kick on in some way, but actually it didn't. And I think you're starting to see those influences more. So we want to tap into that in a way as through our design work.
Yeah, also I think because the whole world becomes a lot more inclusive and fast-paced as well.
Yes.
there's a demand for flexible use of spaces. So you can definitely see,
Post-pandemic, absolutely.
yeah, like in the Resi project, people actually like to have working space more because they start work from home, and in a working environment, they would want more domestic space because they want to make sure if they go to work, it needs to feel as good as home. And if you go to a hotel, you will be able to work on your sofa, not only just in front of a desk.
Yes, sure.
So you can definitely see there is a demand for those spaces. I think where we bring is because we were never trained traditionally as an interior designer. So we don't have a certain way of learning designing. We actually come from a architectural school which focuses on narratives and methodology.
And
Production, yeah.
Yeah.
So every project when we start, we don't really have a particular way of like mood board and then CGIs. We actually depend on each project. We have different way of working.
Yeah.
For example, like model making, we have like collages, or even sometimes we make videos to kind of test ideas. And then I think what's different to other thing is also maybe because we're architectural background, so we are quite technical as well. So in a space, not only what you can see, but also things you feel, like how the air come out from the grill matters to us because that's part of the experience. And if the space smells nice, if there's a sense system to it, where the AVIT is, how the lighting works, it all matters. And then it is important because it's holistically, it's an experience.
Yeah.
So we look at from much more, I think, from a more kind of a overall experience point of view rather than just,
360, Absolutely, and it's the same. Actually, it's interesting what you say about you're not all kind of classically trained interior designers. You all come from a kind of different background. Definitely the same for you with your global kind of elements for your work from the start.
I would say, I guess, what makes me unique is, I guess, like I said, like, on you guys, I'm not formally trained. I didn't really, go to architecture school. I haven't really worked for anyone in the industry. So I guess everything that I'm doing is, I guess, my interpretation of the world as I see it, obviously guided by projects or by clients. And I guess just a relaxed approach, because I like to say that my spaces have like relaxed elegance, and I think design, should be for everyone. And I feel like, when you're in a good space, you should feel relaxed, and you shouldn't feel too stuffy. So I would say that's what makes me unique, I think.
Definitely, it's great. And obviously, and again, interestingly, the way you all use materials is very key as well. So since and that's obviously, I think, dictates or defines your style, your aesthetic. Just wanted to kind of discuss that a little bit more. And are there any ways you've used materials? I know you use a lot of natural materials and kind of woods and stuff in your work.
Yeah, I would say, I guess, I'm always pushing the limits of materials. I will probably find that a finish that's impossible to do, but find a way to get it done. Materials play such a big role, especially in my furniture design, because I am quite a tactile person. I do like, my furniture. I like people to touch it, even though it's beautiful. I want you to touch it, because a lot of work has gone into choosing those materials and selecting those materials. So, it just varies really. Yeah.
And with Holloway Lee, you have this natural materials meets kind of unexpected industrial elements as well. So it's obviously something you're thinking about.
Yeah, I think we definitely like to mess around with how, like, challenge the traditional use or use of that material in a new way, or we might see something that we think that's really interesting. How do we do that like this? A couple of examples that are rolling on the screen, so they're helpful for you to imagine. Is we designed this showroom for a sanitary ware, a bathroom brassware company, and we wanted to create these backdrops that would have the product as kind of the front and center thing, but almost like a slice of what would be a traditional Victorian bathroom with a sort of tiled skirting and a cornice. And to achieve that, we had this idea. Well, we wanted them to be translucent because they're going to be in the window, and how do we make that translucent? But how do we add some color into that? And so we came to using resin, and then it was like, well, how are we going to get resin to look like the bathroom? So then we had to kind of design a 3D scan of the room, and then work out how to the process that would get us to that. And we ended up working with a company in Turkey who do all the interiors for London buses. So they do all the kind of fiberglass staircases. And even though they didn't do resin, they did, and they could make the shape of the resin. So then we went through so they would cut it out of digitally, CNC the cast. They would make a mold from that, and then we would pour the resin to make pour it flat as a screen, and then that would be put up as this backdrop. And so with something like that, it's about kind of working out how to get from there to there, but then going on an interesting, innovative journey along the way, which is kind of where we delight in the process, because we can go to the factory, see it happening, and do different samples of different things. To get the bubbles out was really tricky.
It's those production elements you were talking about before. That's such a key part of what you do. And I know there was one of the hotels you did a metal bar you dipped the metal to make it kind of
so the iridescent, weirdly the client brief there was like they wanted this Joshua Tree inspired aesthetic in this hotel in London. So okay, it's quite a weird brief. And then so part of the Joshua Tree theme was that it's a psychedelic pilgrimage spot. So we wanted to bring the iridescence into the project. So how do we do that? It's like on my bike chain, it has this iridescent metal, and I thought, kind of, how do we do that on a larger scale? And usually it's just used as a protective coating for small industrial cogs and scaffold clamps and stuff like that. So we had to do a lot of ringing around different places, the different electroplaters, to find the one that had the biggest bath, to find that they could do the dipping on a large scale. And so there's so much innovation, so much research, I guess, that goes into that to try and get you to have that thought. And then once you've presented an idea to a client, then it's like, okay, now we need to work out how we're going to do that. But that's the great thing, you commit to an idea, work out how to do it. The amount of emails we get saying, where did you do that iridescent metal? It's like, many hours.
It's a long time to get
many hours.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's funny.
And we talked about sustainability and flexible living, and what do you think are the other key issues that are going to kind of inform design as we look forward into the next 5 to 10 years?
I think there is an emphasis on well-being for sure. Like after pandemic, especially, I think people realize actually, we deserve to live a better life, work, balanced life. So I think there is definitely an emphasis from our designers being, have spaces that dedicated for meditation, for focused thinking, for just having a breakout space in the offices, for example, and a lot use of emphasis on like natural lighting and plants. So I think that is more looked at, a lot more attention to that.
Yeah, because you've already done projects that are very biophilic in their kind of idea.
Yeah, we use plants in a lot of our projects. I was just in Munich last week doing 2 days of placing plants on our recent hotel project. So it's an important part of the thing that we do, but so kind of separately to that, sustainability is the way we're kind of trying to look at it in our work is with hospitality in particular. There's this accepted 5-8 year refurb cycle, which we're trying to kind of we're trying to encourage as much reuse of the existing, because like the kind of elephant in the room with everything we do is inherently construction is unsustainable because you're making new things, right? So the most sustainable thing with the road would be to not do the project. But if you can find ways of just picking out everything that is an asset, making the most of that, but then also not adding as much as, instead of layering up a room with hundreds of layers of substrate and then to get to a final material, like let's think about a material we can use that will just be one layer of thing on there, or let's keep as much of that and just add this. And so it's about low impact design as well as choosing sustainable materials. So the fewer things you put in, the more sustainable it will be as well.
The best way you possibly can.
So we think about low impact's also great because it's low cost, so client will love it. But that's the kind of way we're kind of going. It's no point having all these new things and then one recycled material as the final finish. It should be more of a global view on the project and how much goes into that project. Yeah.
Also, just being like future facing, having a design that is not going to strip out in 5 years to 10 years time, and build into that with flexible substrate or like provisions, so you can change the space to another use. So I think that's quite. I think to add on that, I think also we as designers have certain power to do that. But overall, I personally think the statute regulations and standards needs to change, because a lot of things is about ticking the box, getting that rating, getting that standard. So there's a lot of over design in especially MEP and architectural structural design. So at the end of the day, you probably doesn't need that much of kits that not even contribute to the space, to the experience you have. So a lot of time that the cost, especially when we look at cost analysis, the big portion of cost are in behind the walls. But the consultants can't do much about it because they have to meet certain requirements.
And they would rather be safe and over-specify than under-specify. So you end up, the projects seem to be so much more complicated than they would otherwise seem at the beginning.
That's true. So I mean, in terms of kind of where do you see yourself going in the next 10 years? What are the kind of the things you want to tackle that you've not tackled yet?
Oh gosh. God, that's a good
you've been
question.
very residential, but I guess imagine.
I think for sure,
hospitality will be in
definitely
the
commercial, hospitality in the future. I mean, I'd love to go into design. I love to design yachts, planes, everything. I guess just to go as far as my talents will take me, and just leave the world a beautiful place.
Yes, that's lovely, absolutely. And my kind of last question was, if you have any advice for people starting out, what would your advice be for them? Kind of, if they're just kind of on the beginning of that journey.
It's gonna sound so cliche, isn't it? But I would say enjoy it. I mean, it's tough. I mean, nothing's easy, but if you're dedicated and determined enough, you will get there. So.
Fantastic.
I would say like two things I think served us well. The first one would be that to start out, you have to do a lot of free work to get the project in. As soon as you get a sniff of a client, you go after it, and that inevitably is an unpaid pursuit. But every time we did that, we did a piece of work that was associated with that pitch or that conversation that was good enough that we could then use that in the next pitch. So then it meant that there was never an abortive process. It was always building towards something that when we did finally start to make to start to land those first good projects, it was because we had enough of a catalogue, even if it was unbuilt, that there was stuff we could show and say that was a thing. So that was really important for us. And do your own accounts for the first few years. Because you could.
What you said about just doing conceptual, like with me, because I couldn't get any projects when I first started because I just wasn't trained. I didn't know anyone in the industry, so I spent a lot of time just doing conceptual projects. and just building my portfolio. And through doing those, I learnt what my style was. I learnt what I like. I learnt, I guess, my work process. So when the real projects came, like, I still made a few mistakes, but I knew exactly. I was a bit more confident. So I would say spend a lot of time investing in yourself, investing in, I guess, building your skill set. And just be open to learning. That's for sure. I didn't know anything when I first started.
Yeah.
Still
Embrace it. And now, how about you?
I think most importantly is don't stay at home, go out.
Yeah.
Just go out, look, get inspired, observe, and meet a good partner.
Yeah.
That's how we met, because we left the previous practice same year, but we had our previous business partner who never quit their jobs actually, and then we both started working from home at the beginning to save cost, but then I just I need to go out, and then I went and I bumped him in the street. He said, "I come to sit with me, let's share a studio," and then I said, "Okay, have a look." And it saves him the next month, apparently.
I got a recommendation for you.
All right. Fantastic.
So we started. So then we started collaborate, and then it worked out really well, and then formalized the partnership. And I do think having a partner helps, because it's like a sounding board. Sometimes you're quite clear what you want, but it's just good to talk to someone.
There's so many decisions you have to make day to day, right? And it just helps to have.
And you can have some of your lifetime, because someone is in the office.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Good to have good people around you.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you. I could talk to you for another hour, but we have to move on. But
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Crikey, what an amazing session. I feel that we've headed into a slightly different mindset this morning. Highly considered, future-facing, very exciting. Storytelling, so important for these practices. Mimi, you said you like to build the narrative around your client's lifestyle. Alex, you spoke about well building, it sounded really interesting, and material alchemy to do all that innovation. And but there was more. Now you talked about the personal touch, working with craftsmanship. We heard about low impact. We heard about recycling, sustainability, a whole holistic experience of interiors. Thank you, Ben, for leading the session so beautifully. These people are ones to watch. You heard it here first. I think we should give them a very big round of applause to show our appreciation.